A lot of times when I see folks who get frustrated with their team, it's the reactiveness that they kind of sink their teeth into, and then they get frustrated compared to just having proactive conversations. And so at the end of the day, when you have a proactive conversation, you can move from there. Welcome to CEO Conversations, the private practice podcast. I'm your host, Brandy Mabra. This is your one-stop shop to learn the business side of your practice on a deeper level. On this show, we empower you to own your CEO status to scale your practice for growth, sustainability, and profit. Listen in as we talk about how to market your practice to gain more visibility, hire, build, and engage your ride or die dream team, create streamlined operations, and make financial decisions as a CEO. It's time to show up as a confident leader to create a practice and life you love. Let's get started. Hello. Welcome to another episode of CEO Conversations, the private practice podcast. It's Brandy here, and I am sitting at my desk with my cup of coffee looking at a beautiful day. Beautiful day. Sun is shining. This is a great week, and it is actually the week that my son is graduating high school. It is so crazy to think that 18 years has come and gone, and I am sitting here getting ready for him to walk across the stage and get his high school diploma. So, this is a really fun week as I'm recording this, and it makes me think back to the freedom that I was able to create within my career after owning my CEO status. And one of the things I know to be true is because you own a business, and one of the things I take on because I own a business, every day is a day that you can decide what you do and what you do not do. And there are elements of this that people do not take advantage of. And it breaks my heart. It really does. It breaks my heart. So there's been a lot of reflecting that I've done over the course of the past couple weeks, just trying to prepare. I've cried multiple times, I'll be honest. But at the end of the day, one of the things I'm so proud of myself that I did was once I got to a place where I recognized I was missing out on too many memorable moments. I was working way too many hours. I was tired, I was exhausted. I started to set non-negotiable boundaries and non-negotiable things that I would always make sure that I did for my family. And one of them was making sure that I took my son to school every day. Unless if I was on vacation or, maybe sometimes had an early meeting. But for the most part, throughout his whole school career, I have been the one to take him to school in the morning. And most times, been able to be the one to pick him up, whether if it was from daycare or if it was maybe from someone's house or something. But it's always been me to be able to have those memories and to look back on the conversations that we've been able to have, to look back on the prayer time that we implemented in the morning just to make sure that his day was started off right, from the disagreements that we had as he got older and he started to step into more of his own opinions and thoughts and ideas, to just daily check-ins. How are you doing? He was busy. He's been busy. He had a really great basketball career throughout high school, got, basketball offers for college, and so during that time I wanted to make sure that there were touch points, and that was a boundary for me. So I'm curious to know, as you're sitting here thinking about your practice and the freedom that you can really step into when it comes to how you run your practice, what you decide to focus on in your practice, how you decide to set up your schedule inside of your practice. What are your non negotiables? And I think that this is important for you to check throughout the year because sometimes your non negotiables can change. What needs to be different? And so, as we're going into the last month of the quarter, going into June, we're getting ready to step into summertime. I know some practices will start to slow down, some practices may not. But during this time, it's always an opportunity to reflect on how has the first part of the year gone? Is it going well? Are there things that we need to change? And I think starting with you first is always important. How's your energy? How are you doing? Are you taking time for yourself? Are you running yourself ragged? Are you putting yourself first? All of these things are important. And it's nice just to do some check-in. So as I'm going into this new stage of life for me, because at this point in time I have my bonus son, he's 15, and my focus is starting to kind of shift a bit in, in regards to the new stage of life I'm in. I'm doing that for myself. What are my non-negotiables at this point in time? What am I willing to maybe bend and what am I not willing to bend? Also, my business is evolving too. So I posted in stories on Instagram talking about how I've had to revamp my team. So I lost a fabulous team member, amazing. She was with me for almost 4 years and did a lot. I got very spoiled over that point in time. And so now I'm in a place of having to revamp things, and so that's been my focus for this quarter. We'll go into June with the same focus, and by the end of June, going into quarter 3, I should be in a pretty good place for what my team's gonna be to get me through for the rest of the year, and then I'll reassess. But it's all a journey, it is all a journey, and so as I'm saying this to you, as I'm talking through this, I want you to give yourself grace for wherever you're at in your season. I want you to make sure that you are not being too hard on yourself. Yesterday, we had a call for a private practice CEO. And on that call, there was a lot of great topics and just talking about when you are in a place or a season where you're reworking things, transition, maybe you feel like you're barely getting by, and that is where a lot of times operational processes have to be reworked, focuses, making sure that you're focusing on data. Why do you feel that you're barely getting by? Like where's that feeling coming from? So acknowledging it, digging into it a little bit more. Sometimes there's seasons, where things are hard and there's seasons where things feel plentiful. But at the end of the day, you always have the perception for how you view things. And the perception is the most important thing when it comes to your practice because it's your perception that's going to allow for you to take that next step or to implement that next strategy in order to get you to the next stage of business growth. The official topic for today's podcast, though, is we're going to dive into the 3 most overlooked things private practices can do to build an engaged team. And the reason why we're talking about this is because it goes back to what I was saying, freedom. When I put my non-negotiable in place for the fact that I was going to make sure I took my son to school every single day, and I decided that I was no longer going to just be at the mercy of my career, then things changed. But also, I had to make sure my team was on board and that things were good inside of the practice. So that way I could have that type of freedom. And it comes with an engaged team. And I know very, very, very common where folks will hire and they will hire from a place of desperation. They will hire from a place of, let me rush this process because I just want to get someone in the door. I need to hire a warm body, and then they get frustrated because their team isn't the team that they need them to be, right? The team doesn't have the strengths that they need. The team doesn't have the skills that they need. They're asking a lot of questions. They're running the owner ragged. Maybe they're running if they have a leader in place, like an office manager, practice manager, that practice manager is buried and putting out fires. And so the owner can't necessarily leverage the leadership that they put in place effectively because there's so much stuff that's happening. And so when you rush your hiring, that is baseline. I've said this before, that's baseline where you have to take your time in order to get to a place of having an engaged team. What's really interesting is when we start to scale back teams for some practices where we have to scale back, whether if it's financial or if it's just like these folks gotta go, like they gotta go. When we start to scale back, then you can see where you get to the root of an engaged team and people who actually have buy-in for the mission and vision of the practice. Like, it's so good. You can see, like, where the owners, they start coming to the calls, and I'll meet with them one-on-one, like our clients, and they look lighter, they look more lifted, they wear brighter colors, they don't look like they're run ragged, and it's because of their team dynamic. When you are putting yourself in an environment where your team is not engaged or they're not supported or they don't feel like they're supported, that weighs on everybody. It weighs on you as the owner, but also it weighs on you as from a team membership too. It's like a bad environment. So when we're talking about business culture, we need for that business culture to be in alignment with truly the values and beliefs of the practice, but also for your team and for you and for the sanity as you're doing this work. So I wanted to dive into just what it takes to build an engaged team. and to make sure that you are able to step into that freedom that you are able to have. I know a lot of folks, maybe if you're in that solo space, maybe you feel like, I don't want a team. There are some people who get to a place where they're like, I don't want to hire one more person. And the reason why is because the people who I have right now, they have made this an awful experience for me. And I just don't think I can get it right. And I don't want to say either way of thinking is wrong or right, because this is all about your vision and your mission and what you want to build and what your version of your empire is. But I don't want you to come from a place of, I don't want to do this anymore because of team. Because at the end of the day, when you have the right team members, it's really good. I've hired, you guys have heard me say this before, I've hired hundreds of people, and it was always the ones who were engaged. And once I got to a team that was engaged, that was a high performers, or if they were middle performers working towards to be high performers, it was a completely different experience for me. I loved going into work. I loved, just the interactions. I loved the team meetups that we would have, and all of it became different compared to when you have some Debbie Downers or people were just not a good fit. Sometimes people just aren't a good fit. It doesn't necessarily make them a bad person. They're just not a good fit. They're not a good fit for what you're building, and that's okay. So the first things that we think about with team engagement is making sure that you're paying attention to where you're at in your business stage of growth. This is so important. Like, where are you at in your stage of business growth? Who do you need on your team? I believe, and what I've experienced is whenever you're hiring, you're looking for leadership potential in every single position, from the admin to the provider to the clinical team to your biller. Like, it does not matter. Marketing person, it does not matter. You are looking bare bones for a leader, somebody who can take responsibility for their job and who wants to take responsibility for their job. The nice thing about it is when you start with this frame of mind, it allows for you to build upon it, right? Especially as entrepreneurs, you're creating something out of nothing. You can't start off right off the bat. And even if you're at seven figures and you can't have like this mass crazy leadership team, and even though that's the vision, you need people who are in a place where they can show glimmers of that and they can work their way into that, I believe, in order to make your journey easier. And this is even if they don't get to a place like, for example, if you hire admin and they get to a place of being a practice manager, and then the next stage would be a stage of like COO, and they don't ever get to that place within your practice, that's okay because you're going to benefit from that person as they're growing, as they're learning more, as their strengths are definitely being made stronger. And it's a nice thing to watch, but it starts with leaders. It starts with people who are excited about what they do, who want to grow in their career and don't just want to come in and set up camp inside of your practice. A lot of people get frustrated because they want people to stay like years and years and years. And I think, as just from a job market perspective, as new generations come, out and grow in their careers and different things, I think we're past that. Most people don't want to go to a job and stay for 30 years. I'm sorry, they just don't. However, if you can get someone inside of your practice, whether if it's a year, 2 years, 5 years, and they're making a difference and they're leaving that practice better than the way that they found it, that is a win. So I would rather for you to have somebody who is a rock star come into your practice, work for a year, compared to hiring somebody that you think would be, whether if it's budget or you're kind of settling, and for that person to be inside of your practice for a year, because it's going to be two totally different experiences. The idea is to have deep enough conversations with that person so that way maybe 1 year can turn into 2 years, 2 years can maybe turn into 3 years, just depending on what their growth aspirations are and what they want to do from a team perspective, projects where they see themselves in 5 years. So that's why it's important to have some of these conversations that we'll talk about. But at the end of the day, if you just start with that leadership characteristic, then that is a game changer. If you're hiring somebody who just wants to come in and kind of just get a paycheck, that's not the person. You're going to be so frustrated by that person. You're going to get so much gray hair from that person, and I don't want that for you. So the other question that I always get is, okay, well, like, how do we handle, cuz even in today's times, a lot of people are looking for some type of balance or some type of ability to make sure that they're able to kind of what I wanted to do when I was, in my career, right? I wanted to make sure I could be there for my family, but I still am very career ambitious. And there are people, if once you get a leader, that will want maybe the same thing. They'll want to be able to take time off to be with their family. They're going to want to maybe flex their hours and things. And so there's different ways that you can do this. The hard part that most people run into is, how do I do it in a way that doesn't impact the business? And so this is where sometimes complications can come in when it comes to conversations. And this is where you, as an owner, need to be very clear on why you're doing what you're doing, why you're saying some of the things that you're saying. And it's okay for you to have a level of transparency, because your job at the end of the day is to make sure that the business doesn't go out of business. So that way you can stay in business and everybody can get their paycheck. If you are very honest about that, if you can say, I don't want to run you ragged, I want this to be a good experience for you. I'm struggling with this because if we were to do this, then here's going to be the implications of this decision. So I'm just trying to fill it out. My job is to make sure that we all have a place to come to work. And I want to make, and I take that very seriously. So I'm trying to figure out what is the best way. So a lot of times when you have providers who maybe need time off, maybe they're requesting the same time for vacations, especially as we're going into summer. A lot of times you see this during the holidays. It's important for you to be very transparent about why you're doing what you're doing. So if you put a policy in place for maybe only one provider can be off at one time, then explain why. And then see if there's something else that you can do and partner with them to make sure that they're set up for success. So there's like little nuances that happen. It's not Leadership is a skill set. I truly believe that. And not everybody is a natural leader. Some people have to work very hard to definitely step into that place of leadership, get comfortable with it, learn more about it. But it can be learned and it can be taught if it you want to become a better leader. It starts with the desire to become a better leader. Within leadership conversations, it's the little things that throw people off. Like, I need this vacation time, but you have to say no, or you have to push back a bit because another person needs the exact same vacation time. So it's like little stuff like that that always throws people off. And one of the things I always say is partner with your team. Have real conversations. Just address what I always like, my go-to saying is, address the elephant in the room. Like, what's the elephant in the room? And be honest about it. Just be upfront about it. One of our clients, she was in a place of burnout and struggling, and she was very honest with her team about what she was going through, and her team was so receptive to it. You're not a robot. You don't have to show up perfect. You don't have to show up, with this big mask on. I'll be honest, there are some things maybe you need to keep to yourself. You don't want to scare people. Like if you're, for example, the practice is maybe struggling financially, how you explain that needs to be in a scripted way, just as an example, but it doesn't mean that you can't say, there's some things that the practice is going through that I'm trying to work through in order to make sure that we're set up for success. You don't have to go into, well, the practice is losing thousands and thousands of dollars every single month, and I'm afraid that we're going to have to file bankruptcy. I mean, there's a difference in how you message things, but it doesn't mean that you have to mask yourself either. It's all in messaging compared to masking. And as a leader, those are the conversations that you have to start to master in order to have an engaged team. So, to put some structure around this episode, I want to give you 3 things that you can do to engage your team. So, the first one kind of taps into what we've been talking about. Support your team's overall emotional well being. This is also to help support your emotional well being as well. The more that your team feels supported emotionally, the better off your team will feel, the better off you will feel, because you'll start to form bonds within your team, and your team will start to form bonds within each other, which allows for so much cohesiveness to happen. And it allows for folks to see each other outside of, you're the provider, I'm the admin, you're the clinical, you're the biller, you're the owner. It just allows for people to see people as people. At the end of the day, that's what we truly are. We're people. We are people who are flaws and different experiences and different things we've been through. And we're all bringing that into a company. We're all bringing that to the table. So, when you are supporting your team's overall emotional well being, this does not mean a lot of times when I say this, people are like, oh, well, we should just let them get away with murder. No, that's not, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that you're partnering with them, right? You're making sure that they're good. You are making sure that you're talking to them as a person. If you recognize that they might be going through some things, then recognize it, right? Talk about it. It doesn't mean that you have to just accept any old behavior. There was a team member that I had who was going through a really hard financial time, very hard financial time. You could see it, it was written all over her face, and she was just getting beat up. And I recognized it because her demeanor changed, her body language changed, how she was showing up. She was kind of quiet, more reserved. And because I pay attention to body language, I pay attention to how my teams like show up and what they're putting out in the world, then I was able to pull her to the side and say, "Hey, how are you doing?" I didn't go into tell me what's going on and about finances, "Well, how's the money?" No, I just asked her like, "How are you doing today? I see something is different. Are you open to tell me more about it?" And she was, so she told me, she's like, "I've just been going through a really, really rough time." And they were facing foreclosure and car repossessions. And so she's trying to get to work. And there were so many things. And so from person to person, and especially during those times, single mom, everything else, I related to it. And I was happy that she told me that. So I was able to partner with her on what she needed. And then the company I was with actually had some additional resources that was able to help her financially too. So when you actually talk to your team, dig a little bit deeper, don't have just surface level conversations, it can be very impactful. Now here's the thing though, and this is where people, when I was talking about the little things when it comes to leadership, here's the thing when it starts to impact the business. So she's going through a hard financial time. I've partnered with her, made sure she had the resources that she needed. I was aware of the situation. She felt comfortable telling me about the situation. I thanked her for trusting me with this. And then we talked about her schedule proactively. Why? Because during hard times, things can happen. During hard times, your team, regardless if they're a high performer, low performer, middle performer, things are going to change about their performance in some way, shape, or form. So we talked about her schedule because if she needed days off, I needed to know ahead of time. If there were times where she thought she was going to be late, I needed to know that ahead of time. So we went back and talked about her schedule. How is the schedule? Does it still make sense? Do we need to make any changes? So that way we were having a proactive conversation. So whenever you're engaging your team, whenever you're looking at emotional well being, you have to look at the whole picture and how is that going to impact the business and come from a proactive standpoint. So when you're coming from a proactive standpoint and you're partnering with your team, it makes the world a difference. So I already knew that she needed days off. We planned out what her days off were going to be so that way she could go and take care of things. She gave herself days so that way if she needed to call the mortgage company or she needed to call the car loan people, if she needed to, if her end up something happening to her car, she had days baked in so that way she could go take care of what she needed to take care of. Compared to if we never talked about her schedule, she wouldn't have been able to have days there to take care of stuff, and she would have called off. Like, she would have just called out, and so now here we are as a team, as a practice, relying on her, and she called out. And now I'm scrambling, and I'm struggling. So, at the end of the day, when you partner with your team, have real conversations, check in, see how open they are to talk to you about what's happening, then it allows for you to proactively make sure that the business is good. I did not put the business first. I said, I want to make sure that you're set up. There's a real thing about your schedule. We rely on you. And so I want to make sure that you are okay. But also, I need to make sure that the team is good too. So, what do we need to do? And so she talked about, I probably need some days off. I probably need some time. Okay, cool. Take the time. And then I told her if there's anything that's happening, make sure you communicate to me ahead of time. So if you can see where you're going to have to be late, if you can see that anything is going to keep you from coming in, let us know as soon as possible. So whether if it was like calling in to me or talking to like her direct supervisor, like all of that, but it was a very proactive conversation. So I'm thinking a lot of times when I see folks who get frustrated with their team, it's the reactiveness that they kind of sink their teeth in too. And then they get frustrated compared to just having proactive conversations. And so at the end of the day, when you have a proactive conversation, you've given them everything that they need to be successful. So the tools that they need to be successful, and then you can move from there. So using the same team member as an example, she was able to get through her situation. Her schedule, was what it was, and she was able to get through that situation, but we were able to partner on that situation. There have been other team members where they've ended up going through a really rough situation, but they were acting a hot mess before they got to that situation, so that conversation was completely different, but it was still a conversation. So with that conversation, it was more or less, "You have all of this stuff on your record, and now you've hit this situation. If you had not done all this stuff before you hit the situation, I would be able to do something different." So again, same conversation. What do you need and how can I help? And what do you think is the best way to handle this situation? They gave me their opinion. And then I'm basically telling them, well, this is what the policy is. This is what the policy says. I can't do anything different for you than what I would do with any other team member because that's not fair. That's not right. So, what do we need to do? I don't want you to lose your job. So, what do we need to do? And a lot of times in these conversations, using we. So that way they understand it's not just a you thing, it's a we thing. Now, when it gets to a place of accountability and responsibility, then that's where you're able to say some of these decisions were your decisions. So I'll be honest, like I've had to let someone go. Someone was having a really, really bad attendance issues and they ended up going on a trip and they weren't able to get back on time. And I ended up having to let them go because they weren't able to get back on time. And so they were upset about it. They're like, "Why were you letting me go? It's not my fault. It's not my fault that my flight was delayed. It's not my fault that I wasn't able to get to work." And I said, "No, it wasn't your fault. However, you've had all these other times before that, and that is really what's causing this. Not this one time, because one times are going to happen. It's everything before this one time that is why we're here and why we're having this conversation." So you have to keep things in perspective. And so this is where accountability comes into play. This is where you can support people, but you can still have honest and real conversations. And so when we're thinking about the emotional well being, it's not about being a doormat. It's just about being honest, understanding, having empathy, showing support, but also being very clear on what is happening company wise and what they need to do because you have to pay attention to your other team members. And this is what people start to learn when their team gets bigger. People watch. They do. They watch. They watch how you handle things. They watch the conversations that you have. They talk amongst each other. And they tell one another. And whether or not you think that's happening, oh, yes, they do. They do. So if you think that everything that's happening inside your office is confidential, it is not. And so making sure that you're paying attention to, again, team dynamic, body language, knowing your team on a deeper level is all important and for you to know what they're going through as people. So support your team's overall emotional well being. To enhance your communication. This was a really good one. One of my clients, she wrote a policy and procedure, and she thought the policy and procedure was very clear. She took it to her team, and there were things that were missing procedure wise. So she had to enhance the policy and procedure. A lot of times this happens. You'll write a policy and procedure from your point of view, think that it's good. You'll roll it out to the team, and the team will punch holes in it. Like, well, what about this? What about this? What about this? What about this? So, a lot of times you have to be open to that whenever you're writing policy and procedures. This is why I always say policy and procedures are never one and done. They're always ongoing, they're always fluid. And if you look at a really good policy and procedure, you'll see the revisions, like the date that it was created, and then all the revisions that's happened to it because somebody asked a question, somebody pushed the policy and procedure, somebody didn't follow the procedure, somebody found a loophole. So all these things start to get put into action for you to have to update the policy and procedure. But you want to enhance your communication. You also need to understand, I've said this before, what is your team's communication style? Everybody likes to be communicated with differently. And some people it's a meeting, some people it's a one-on-one, some people it's a email, some people it's a phone call. Some people are more hands-on. So you have to understand how people like to be communicated with and how your particular team likes to be communicated with overall. and what works for your practice. So inside of private practice CEO, there's a couple different ways that we always talk about, like the communication with your team. And so this is through formal team meetings where you have an agenda, you're sitting down on a monthly basis, you're having conversations, but sometimes meetings can turn into unproductive meetings. So you want to be careful of that. The other way that you can communicate with your team is daily huddles. I think daily huddles are very powerful because it's a way for you to check in with your team on a consistent basis. It's an opportunity for you to put yourself in front of the team. So that way, if they have any questions, it's there. It's also an opportunity for you to identify leaders within your practice where they can help run daily huddles. And you're creating now a different resource for your practice outside of you. Daily huddles are very powerful when you implement them on a consistent basis. I'll have some folks, or I've seen where people implement daily huddles, they get tired, they stop. And so the trick is to make sure that you are implementing them, but you also have backup where sometimes you're running them, sometimes your team member might be running them. The other thing with team meetings, it all comes down to the agenda. So if you think that you're having unproductive team meetings, I like questions. Like, what questions are you trying to answer inside of this team meeting? If there are no questions, or if you write out the question and you realize, like, oh, we could probably answer this in like a 5-minute phone call, and don't have the meeting, do the 5-minute phone call instead. So, paying attention to the subjects that you're talking about inside of your meeting, and again, how your team likes to be communicated with is important overall as a team, and then individually as team members. The other thing is having a communication policy. So, what's the point of each type of communication that you have within your practice? So, if it is a meeting, what's the point of monthly team meetings? If it's a monthly, one of the things I always recommend is a monthly or quarterly operations meeting. So that way you can talk through workflows, processes, systems on a consistent basis. So that way things are always running as efficient and effectively as possible. The other thing is how you communicate as a practice, how you're communicating within your EHR. All those things are important because, again, if there's certain types of communication that need to happen in certain places or at certain times, your team needs to know that. So, enhancing your communication. Communication is one of the things that can always be enhanced. There's nobody who communicates perfectly. There is always somebody because communication is open to interpretation to the person that you're communicating to. So you think that you're clear. The person who's hearing you could be like, I don't understand what you're talking about. So to be very, very clear on the communication, as clear as you can be at all times, and knowing how you like to be communicated with and how your team likes to be communicated with. So that's number two. Number three, ask your team what you can do to be a better leader. And this is so easy, but it's so hard at the same time. So if you ask your team, how can I be a better leader? And they answer the question and you don't like what they say, you got to take that. You got to sit there and you got to take it. So one of the things I always do is during evaluation time, if you are not doing evaluations, teams evaluation inside your office, you need to implement that just as a sidebar. But at evaluation time, sit down, go through evaluation, talk about all the things that they need to improve on. And then for you to ask the question, how can I be a better leader in order to make sure that you're successful going into the new year or going into the new evaluation period, whatever that looks like? And let them answer. And so there's been times where people have said, well, I think that you do a really great job with this, but you know, you don't always explain yourself well, or I feel like that you'll explain something, then it's like fleeting, or sometimes you'll come in and ask me a question and I don't necessarily understand it. And so just allowing for them to fully say how you can become a better leader. And if they say, no, you're good, I love you as a leader, I think you do a great job, then pay attention to how they're saying it. Like, are they saying it just to be saying it, or are they saying it to appease you, or are they really genuine with their response? And so you'll be able to tell. And so if they say like, "No, I think you're doing a great job. Amazing. Thank you. Great." Take it, embrace it, pat yourself on the back and keep it pushing. But you can always ask that. Another opportunity to ask about that is during team meetings. So if you have a monthly team meeting during one-on-ones, if you have one-on-ones with your team members, take time to ask at some point in time. Don't ask it every single time, but you can always ask, how can I be a better leader? A way that you can assert this question more frequently is, what do you need from me to help support you? How can I support you in this time, or how can I support you? And you can always end a conversation with that. And to make sure, again, the idea of this is that you're always on the same page with you and your team and that you are being the best leader that you can be. Because sometimes you'll do something, you'll think like, oh, this is amazing. And there, it just falls flat, or people don't appreciate, people don't appreciate it as much as what you thought that they were going to appreciate it. And it's because it's just not what they needed. But you have to know, just like you want to evaluate them, you need to give them an opportunity to evaluate you as their boss. So, and this is at all stages of business growth. So, even if you have a leadership team, your leadership team needs to be asking your team, how can I be a better leader? And then you need to be asking your leadership team, how can I be a better leader? Because remember, you set the tone. You set the tone of the practice. You are the one who has to be in a place of understanding how the team dynamic is happening, what the practice needs, what the practice doesn't need, having that clarity for where the ship's heading. All of those things are important. Understanding the why. Why are we doing what we're doing? Having that clarity is so important. So these are 3 things that you can do to engage your team, and what I think the 3 most overlooked things, and because they're simple, but they're not, and it's just, you need to partner with your team, be proactive with your team, make sure you're communicating with your team in an effective way, and then asking for that feedback. So that way you can fix things, you can tweak things, you can refine things in order to make a better business culture and a better environment for your team. So when you start to put some of these things in place, they're not hard. They don't cost money. That's the thing about it, they don't cost money. There's no money that you have to spend in order to have an engaged team. You just have to have a clarity for what is required to have an engaged team. So I hope that this is helpful. As a reminder, so we are getting ready to go into June. So we have had Private Practice CEO on waitlist for the month of May. So I created a program called Private Practice CEO Inc., which is Private Practice CEO Incubator, which is a 90-day CEO incubator. And I created it because there was a lot of questions I was getting asked about, I'm not ready for private practice CEO. I would love to be part of that program. Is there something else for me? And so I created something. So it's a small group of owners that I'm working with. We were starting in June. And so if you're listening to this, there's still one more week to apply for it. So there's like one more spot that we have available. So I'll have that in the show notes if you're interested. I will be honest, I do not know what I'm going to do with this. This was something that I just felt a need for. There was a lot of calls I was getting on. I was doing workshops, getting asked questions. I don't have the capacity, nor do I want to create like a whole separate program, but I will work with like a small group of business owners. And so that is what this is. After we go through this round, it's 12 weekly calls, it's live training. We're diving into foundational work of a practice because what I noticed is by the time people would get to me in private practice CEO, a lot of the foundational things were skipped over, right? And so we're now going back and trying to retrain and reteach and re-implement and refine, or even with some of the practices that we're having to scale back. And so there's an opportunity at the foundational level before you get into like growth mode to do some educating and implementing at baseline. They're excited about it, and which makes me excited about it. So we're going to be starting with that on June 6th, and we'll be at it for 12 weeks, 90 days, and I'll see what happens after that. But if you're interested in this one spot, so if you have been eyeing private practice CEO and you're like, man, I would love to be part of that program, I'd love to be part of the retreats and get all the one-on-ones and all the stuff, but I just can't pull that money together, or I'm just not at that stage of business growth, then this program is something that you can dive into and sink your teeth in. It also allows for you to test me out. Okay, so I hope that you have an amazing week. I am off to go enjoy my son's graduation. Yay, and I will talk to you guys soon. Thanks for listening today. I hope you enjoyed the episode and it empowers you as the CEO of your practice. If you enjoyed the podcast, please make sure you subscribe, share the message, and leave a review. If you want more information and support in growing and scaling your practice, click the link in the show notes to take advantage of our free resources or apply to work with me directly. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.